Chapter 11. Since the school was burned down, the teacher and students had to cancel their classes. Kama Bingley had contacted the foundation to ask for new sets of teaching equipment and textbooks, which would take a while to arrive. In the meantime, the only thing the volunteer teacher could do was to design a new school so that the soldiers and the villagers could find the woods to build in the coming few days. There were not many children who lived on the hill and got permission from their parents to come to the school, only some dozens. It would be a waste of manpower and time to build an excessively big school, so Tien employed the old structure but enhanced it to be more solid so it wouldn't require much maintenance. The engineering student sighed and rolled on his mattress, drawing lines across a piece of paper. If they had enough budget, he would order fireproof bricks along with fiberglass mixed materials. They were resistant to any fire set on them and would last forever. Fireproof bricks or fire retardant bricks. Tien smiled at the two rangers who switched duties from guarding the school to guard his hut. As they patrolled by his accommodation, he spotted two men with food carriers and a bundle of bananas walking along the route that intersected with the village. Kama Bingle was waving at him while another unfamiliar young man lifted his hand and greeted him with a Y. The city boy sprang up to awkwardly accept the greeting. The village chief didn't keep the other man guessing and made an introduction. Teacher, this is my son, Long Tay. He's during a short break before exams, so he came home. Ken remembered. Uncle Bingley had told him about the son who was going to a university in the city. He didn't look to be older than 18 to 19 years of age, or just a few years younger than him. To get a Y from a person not much younger made him a little nervous. Sawadee ka, Krutien. I went to the woods with my dad this morning, so I thought a bundle of cultivated banana for you would be good. Long Tay said cordially. His handsome face was planted with a heartfelt smile just like his father's. Krap is a polite ending to a word or sentence for boys and men. Ka is for girls and women. In Thai, Namwa banana is a cultivated banana. The man on the hut looked at the banana bundle, not just one banana, but a bundle of it. That he wouldn't be able to finish it in 1 week and smiled sheepishly. Thanks a lot, but please call me brother. You don't have to call me crew. The younger man agreed to do so and followed his father to the open space under the hut and put the banana on the litter. He raked his eyes over the local, upcountry items that had a sign of use and turned to whisper to his dad. Does he know how to use them? He had been in school downtown since he was a kid, but he had a belief that city people were modernized and had a different way of life than outback people like them. Not at first, but now he's skillful. Kama replied in the native dialect because he was afraid the teacher who was taking drawing paper and walking down the stairs would hear them speaking behind his back. My wife made grilled chicken and sticky rice today. I took some for you. Ding Le opened the stainless pinto, revealing neatly cut pieces of chicken and hot sticky rice, and the sauce on the top tier. Dip them in this joe. I promise it's not too hot. Jaw is a Thai spicy dipping made of fish sauce, lemon, ground chili, sweet basil, coriander, sometimes with pickled fish, and most importantly, roasted uncooked rice. Thank you so much. I could just have some omelette though. That said, Ken was salivating at the sight of the aromatic food before him. It's boring to eat an omelette and fried vegetables every day. If you want something, just let me know. My wife can cook anything. Bingley said generously. He was giving the younger man his food, and the teacher had never asked for it once. It's alright, really. I can do just fine with those meals. He, in fact, preferred Japanese or Western dishes. This was the first time in his life he ever had so much Thai food, especially homey food like this. Go ahead, teacher. It's still warm. The elderly man nudged, and Tien had to take sticky rice into his hand and mold it before putting it into his mouth. He didn't act as reluctantly as before. Why don't you join me? He asked when seeing the visitors watch him with smiles. We've already had breakfast. Tien whined, nervous. You didn't have to bring me the food. It was too much of trouble. Actually, I wanted to introduce my son to you because he speaks the central dialect. Bingley stated his intention. Captain Pupa isn't around much lately. I don't want you to be lonely. The statement made the piece of chicken stuck in his throat. I'm not lonely even if he's not here. The loud protest made the older man laugh out loud. Okay, what about I'm bringing my son along so he can help you build the school, even if he's in political science and not a handyman like you? He was a handyman, all right. The future engineer smiled dryly. He turned towards the tall boy, almost as big as Captain Puka, just like how Uncle Bingley described him. You want to work in the public sector? Most of his friends who chose to study political sciences had a goal to become a diplomat or a politician, following their parents' footsteps. I want to be the deputy chief so I can develop my hometown. That's good, Yancy said faintly. He was ashamed of himself for not having any ideology or far-sighted goal like this younger man. When he chose to study engineering, he had only thought that it would be easier to graduate if he chose something he preferred, and that would also mean less effort. As the city boy was washing the pinto near the earthen jar at the back of the hut, one villager was running and panting towards Kama Bingley, and they started talking in their native dialect. Even if he didn't understand anything, he could tell from their expressions and gestures that something big had happened. The village chief asked his boy to stay with the teacher as he excused himself and hurriedly left. What happened? Tian asked, puzzled. Nothing big. Long Fei's answer sounded uncertain because he didn't want to say more than he should. But once the teacher insisted, he finally slipped out. One of us was haunted. Someone found him in the woods and they carried them back here. Haunted? In broad daylight? They said he went into the forest since daybreak but didn't return. Then someone found him there. The boy scratched his neck, not knowing what to do with the skeptical look on the teacher's face. Can you take me to see him? Ian said out of curiosity. Even if he had never experienced any paranormal activities, he always believed in the saying, if you don't believe it, don't disrespect it motto. I think that's not a good idea. It's not something nice to see. The boy didn't want city people to say that they were superstitious. But I want to see it! Jen gave a final word and pushed the boy out the door. The house that Long Fei brought him to was at the end of the forest. It was a high raised hut that was commonly found in the area. The pigs in the pen behind the house were oinking loudly into an eerie wail that the visitor frowned. The neighbors, male and female, and the elderly people flocked into the house to witness the ritual performed by Maju, or the village's shaman. Ken noticed that there were no children here, Long Day told him that when it came to rituals concerning ghosts, no children were allowed to join because their innocent minds could be easily possessed. The same Juma who had performed a welcoming ceremony on him was sitting cross-legged on the floor and chanting an incantation. In front of him were the offerings, from a bamboo cylinder that contained clear alcohol, a big boiled chicken, a kantoki, or a wooden tray with food and desserts, to the small animal for transport figurines. The man who was possessed was sitting and shivering under a blanket. Only his ashen face was visible. Juma, who looked grim, pulled out the blessed dagger to perform a dance as if he was inviting a holy spirit to take his body. The city boy who joined the riveting crowd sniffed as if he smelled a unique, familiar scent at nightclubs he'd frequented and turned to ask the younger man, "Are you sure he's possessed? Not high?" Longtail smiled embarrassedly, not knowing what to say, so he changed the subject. "Do you believe in ghosts?" "I don't know, but I don't want to see one. What about you?" Yen wondered what an Akha who had access to higher education would say about their traditions. "We believe in spirits and ghosts since ancient times. House spirits, forest spirits, village spirits. All the traditions that pass on to us were based on these beliefs. If you ask me whether I believe in spirits or not, I choose to follow the traditions without questioning them." You, the long answer made Yen at a loss for words. "You're going to make a fine deputy chief," he said, and looked at the ritual, leaving the other man to be bewildered by his statement. Juma was acting as if he was slashing something in the air. Longpei explained that he was getting rid of wandering spirits who had followed the possessed man home. The village's shaman picked up a leaf to chew and hold a clear alcoholic drink in his mouth. He then sprayed the holy water on the man who was crouching down on the floor until his face became wet. Tian grimaced. That holy water was a mixture of alcohol, saliva, and crunched leaves. Must have smelled so nice. If I was a ghost, I'd flee the body in a heartbeat, he thought. The possessed started whining in a low, pitiful hum, yet he didn't look scared out of his wit like the moment earlier. His wife and cousins encircled him and asked how he was doing. Juma walked up to Kama Bingley. Long Tay gave a short translation that the shaman advised the man to rest well. They must put an offering in front of the house and light incense sticks to tell the house spirits to protect him. He must be observed till the next morning. If he didn't fare better, a bigger ritual must be performed in the forest. "I think he'll be better soon," Yen, who stood and watched, said after a long pause. Long Tay cocked his eyebrow in surprise. The teacher was acting skeptical just a few moments ago. "You meant the ghost who followed him home was cast out?" "No one can see ghosts, right? But everyone can see this exorcism. Whether ghosts are real or not, I'd say he'll be spiritually improved." The teacher from the city was saying that this ritual was only for the mind. The Akha boy smiled gently. He wasn't upset that the other man saw it differently. Belief is a matter of personal choice anyway. "You wanna go home now? There's nothing much left to see." Tian craned his neck and saw that how the villagers still surrounded the man. Kama Bingley was still talking to Juma with a solemn expression. "Yeah, all right," he muttered before going down the stairs. Almond Eyes glanced at the offerings someone had brought down and placed next to a bowl in the space under the house with an incense stick. Something still stuck in his mind so he spoke up. "Do the villagers get possessed that often?" Long Tay rubbed his chin, raking his mind over his memory. Even if he was born here, he had spent most of his childhood with his cousins in the city to go to the school. That was why he was traveling back and forth. Actually, our traditions involve spirit offerings, no matter what seasons. I think there were some possession cases, but Dad said it happened a lot lately, and it was only with the people who went to gather something in the deep forest. So the exorcism must be done regularly? If one doesn't see the ghosts up close, he wouldn't be this freaked out. Tian nodded to say he got it and asked no further. He looked back at the house one more time, looking at the white smokes from the incense on the offerings, float to the air with an inquisitive thought. What was the catharsis that drove the ghosts to come out a lot in this season then? That night, the temperature dropped further than usual. The whistling wind blew dried branches to hit against the thatched roof, puncturing it until a hole appeared. The dim light from the kerosene lamp diminished because the oil had run out and wasn't refilled. The slim young man who curled up under the duvet in a thick winter jacket tossed and turned, frustrated. Or perhaps it was because of the exorcism he had witnessed Juma performing and it got stuck in his mind's eyes. He even imagined how the forest spirit that the possessed villager encountered and fell ill looked like. The cricket sound that suddenly died down made the air eerier. Ken was clutching at the duvet and trying to hypnotize himself to fall asleep. Yet, as he started to enter the slumber, a noise was coming from under the hut. His nerves became fully awakened. He craned his ears, but the noise was gone. If a dog was howling, it would make a complete horror scene. He shut his eyes, not wanting to keep them open. All of a sudden, the wind that had stopped moving for a while started blowing into the window, creating crackling noises as if something was walking towards the hut. He chanted a Buddhist incantation, Namo, repeatedly as he felt the thing coming closer and closer. A large dark shadow looming over his head, the way an evil spirit revealed itself to humans in a movie, almost made him scream. Namo is a short title of Namadasa chanting to honor the Blessed One, the Buddha. I know you're not sleeping. The low, raspy voice with a hot breath against his ear made Kian snap. He grabbed the closest weapon and threw the pillow to the target with his eyes closed. But the gigantic ghost caught it as if he must have been a basketball player when alive. Before the freaked out man could shout curses at the ghost, a stream of light flared up in the room. The dark shadow turned out to be a familiar figure in a green camouflage uniform. The dark, intense face was painted with a deep frown and radiating darker energy than any ghosts could. Cap! Shit! Why are you acting so creepy? Ian rubbed his chest and tried to calm down. I saw that the light was out before 11, which was unusual for you. I thought something happened to you. Rupa threw the pillow back at the teacher, who was sitting cross-legged with a deep scowl on the mattress. But what I saw as I came up here was someone chanting Namo as if he was possessed. Nonsense! What are you doing here at this hour? You freaked me out! The tall man sat down and said, I just finished my shift. I haven't seen you for days, so I just wanted to drop by and check if you've caused any troubles. Ken cast him a glare. Yeah, you're going to be in trouble trying to solve a case in which an officer dies inside a handsome teacher's hut. And the weapon is a pillow? That was so beneath me. Pupa shook his head and got even a hotter glare. Now you saw that there's nothing here. You can go home. Tomorrow I have to get up at 5. Why will you be up so early? When you had classes, you didn't work this hard. Long Day asked me to go to the plantation with him. Said he'll teach me how to pick tea leaves. It was Kama Bingle's son who had returned. They must have been close due to similar ages. Don't turn him into another brat. Long Tae is a good boy, good student. He always gets royal scholarships. What kind of man do you think I am? The captain didn't answer, but as he rolled his eyes, Tian finally snapped. He sprang up to drag the officer's strong arm to the door. Go home now! I'm going to sleep! I know. The officer lifted his palms up to signal his resignation, but then he whipped around. Is your fever gone? Yes. Let me see. The dark, handsome face leaned down too fast for him to realize what happened next as the thick, shapely lips were pressed against his smooth forehead. Good night, teacher. The low, gentle whisper faded away along with the cold breeze, leaving only the warmest embrace inside the heart of a stunned man. Yen slowly lifted his hand to touch his forehead as he watched the night visitor vanish from his sight. His fair cheeks heated up and became reddened as blood ran hot, hot all over his body. His head was light despite the cold air. Maybe he caught a fever again. As dawn broke, the rooster's coo could be heard along the route in Papandao village. Wang Pei cast a glance at the man who was dragging his feet next to him and saw that the man couldn't stop yawning. Are you okay, bro? Didn't get enough sleep last night? Someone bothered me as I was about to fall asleep, Tian said tiredly, not only bothered, but even made him unable to sleep. Who was it? It was Captain Pupa. He showed up in the middle of the night. I thought it was the exorcised spirit that came to haunt me. Longface's eyes widened with bafflement. He'd heard from his dad that Captain Pupa was the guardian of this new volunteer teacher, but he had no idea that they would be this close. You two are close. No, Ken said, trying to sound dispassionate. He pointed towards the cascading plantations to change the subject. Look, someone came here before we did. The younger man paced quicker to follow the man in a t-shirt, track pants, and winter jacket who was running downhill and waited there. The teacher stopped and stood between the rows of verdant tea plants, stretching his arms out and taking in the fresh air. He saw them from afar, but to stand here, he realized that the cascading plantations were as vast as that they reached the side of the mountain. Long Tay, who went to fetch two woven baskets, returned and handed on to Tien. Are you ready, bro? He took the basket, not knowing what to do with it, but hold it on his back and followed the son of the village chief. There's not Caesar for cutting the leaves? We use our hands. They're the best tools. Longtay smiled at the man who looked skeptical. Scissors might be quick and convenient, but it can't choose the right buds. That can make the leaves less qualified. You're saying tea from here is of high quality? Most oolong tea comes from China, but ours we're a Taiwanese species. It's moist and has a gentler scent. That's why the middlemen try to pay us as little as possible, so they'll earn more profit when they sell it. So poor people would remain poor. They couldn't keep up with the tricks of this bastard, Ken sighed. He stood up against them once, and his school got burned down. If everyone here rose to fight, wouldn't the whole village be incinerated? He pondered. Long Tay took a new labor towards another route that wouldn't get in the way of others, and started teaching him how to pick tea. Even if he hadn't spent much time here, he still grew up with tea plantations and was as good as plucking the leaves as everyone else. Look at the flushes. When you pluck one, try to get a few young leaves with it too, just like this. He gave a demonstration. You have to pluck it in one go to not bruise the leaves. The city boy nodded and started working. He looked so awkward that the girls and the women who were stealing glances at him couldn't hold back their giggles. Tian gave it a few tries, dropping down broken buds. But once he got the right amount of weight, He started to enjoy the task. The first light lit up the horizon, illuminating the dim expanses of plantations. The volunteer teacher was bending up and down, plucking tea leaves, and filling only one third of the woven basket on his back, started whining. He stretched up, raising his arms high, and twisting left and right. Just a few hours and my back hurt. How can you guys work at all day like this? Long Day stretched to his full height above the tea shrub and gently laughed at the other man's peculiar stretching. We're used to it. Been doing this since we were young. All right. And what about the kids? Why are they doing now? What are they doing now when there's no class? Helping around the house, I guess. Feeding the pigs and chicken. By late morning, they'll be here to dry the leaves in the sun. Let me ask a stupid question. Why are you wasting your time drying the leaves? Why can't we use fresh leaves to make tea? Being from a city didn't mean he was a polymath, and Kian wasn't embarrassed to ask such a naive question. Polymath is a person who knows a lot about many subjects, also a know it all. From my folk knowledge, if the tea leaves are processed by heat from dry roasting and rolling, they won't be aromatic and smooth. So, apart from drying tea flushes in the sun, you have to dry roast and roll them? Yes, but that's done in a factory. Yen scratched the back of his neck, still bothered with something. If you dry the leaves, they weigh less. Why don't you sell them fresh? Have you ever heard of the saying, processing is value adding? Long Tay grinned, not bothered by many questions from the city man. If we pick and sell them fresh, it's like we're selling simple raw products. But to spend more time to dry them, people who buy them from us could skip this step and go ahead with processing. As we're helping them, our products will get a higher price too. Hearing a detailed academic answer, Ken became speechless. He raised his hands to give the younger man a clap. The guy deserved his royal scholarship. The volunteer teacher stepped forward and gave Long Fei a few taps on his thick shoulder. You're going to make a fine deputy chief, he said, and went back to picking tea flushes next to the ladies who cast shy smiles his way, leaving a bewildered Aka boy who, once again, couldn't understand what he meant. It was 9. Even if the sun wasn't blaring, a physical work made someone who wasn't used to it, while wearing a full-blown winter gear, made him strip it off, sweating. Slender arm lifted up to wipe away the clear beads on his forehead as others dropped fresh flushes on large sieves along the cliff. Long Day said that they had to wait until the leaves dried, which took up to 4 to 6 hours. Then they had to move the flushes into the shade and left them for another 16 hours. They worked their asses off for as little as a few hundred baht per kilogram. How could they ever make a fortune? Ian rubbed his grumbling stomach. He turned left and right, wanting to ask Kama Bingle's son to get something to eat, but he spotted him talking intensely with the villagers. Is everything all right? Long Tay turned at the man who whispered behind him. He looked hesitant but started talking. Please don't think we're superstitious, but he just told me that another guy from the next village saw a ghost. Kian didn't know what to say, so he shot a joking question. Wow, it's quite a haunted place, isn't it? You think it's the same ghost? I'm not sure. They said before the ghost materialized, he smelled burnt dry glass in the wind, and the ball of fire appeared. Sometimes it was just the sound of walking. The worst case that the man became so feverish was yesterday. Dad told me that the guy saw the ghost's face that scared him to death. The city boy looked down on the ground, his eyes rolling as if he was trying to crack a puzzle. Thin lips were pressed tight, And then he looked up to stare into the younger man's eyes. Have you ever tried smoking weeds? What? Longtail blurted out, bewildered, and added, No, never. Marijuana plantations were cleared for oolong tea, but maybe they did in the old days. Yen grinned, his eyes shining with an eerie glow. I think we should go and catch some ghosts in our free time. I want to see how they look like. The structure and size of the new school weren't an overturn of old ones. The engineering student adjusted the roof structure to be more practical by adding more sun shields and raised the roof pitches to be higher to allow more ventilation. With the help from the military, there were enough construction tools this time. Many engineering officers in greenish khaki t-shirts were measuring the length of the ground and pinpoint the spots to put up the poles that held the building in place against the strong wind on the cliff. Yen sat cross-legged and talked about the construction with Staff Sergeant Yod under the shade of a big tree. Last time, it took only a few days to complete the school. This time, we wouldn't be able to help much. We're having our hands full. The older man said with a hint of a complaint. His sun-kissed face looked exhausted, as if he didn't have enough sleep. What makes you so busy now? Even Captain Pupa had vanished out of sight. He wondered if something bad happened to the man. The teacher gazed into the distance as worry rose in his chest. Our informant smelled something fishy in the woods. Our patrols have a longer range to cover. You guys must be exhausted. That's all right, teacher. We must serve and protect our people and country. Staff Sergeant Yod smiled, honestly, and it made Tien smile with him, feeling just as proud. This fishy thing, does it have something to do with how the villagers are being haunted more than usual in the woods? He asked to gauge the staff sergeant's reaction. Have you heard? The older man's expression turned solemn. About the ghosts? Come on. A guy from our village was so spooked out the other day. I was at the exorcism. He laughed out loud to make light of the situation, and Staff Sergeant Yod started to relax. It has nothing to do with ghosts. Perhaps it was hallucination. The fishy thing is how the patrol police were asking us to look for criminals in the forest. Staff Sergeant Yod went on to warn the hot-headed teacher, worried for his safety. Please don't go looking for troubles. Do not go into the deep forest. You don't know how many of them are in there, along with all the dangerous animals. Tian was a little alarmed, so he looked away. A tall man in Akha traditional clothes was walking towards them with a pinto and plastic bags. Long Tay, over here! He cried out and sprinted towards the younger man to help him carry the food. The city boy looked at the bag with many kratip or bamboo rice containers, with a pinto and a big plastic canteen, asking, Are you trying to feed the whole troop? Dad said this is for the soldiers too. Long Tay laid out a folded mat that he was carrying on his shoulder under a canopy, and put the food neatly on it: grilled pork, spicy canned fish salad, and the staple that couldn't be missed: soft-boiled vegetables and chili dipping. Staff Sergeant Yod looked at his watch and got up to call his men to take a lunch break. Took that opportunity to whisper to the younger man. So, about that thing, what did you got for me? The son of the village chief looked distressed, but he finally answered. Just a little above the waterfall to the north, around 7 to 8 kilometers, there's a dense forest. We don't usually go that far, but this winter it's usually dry. We have to wander deep to find mushrooms and herbs. The teacher made him ask for more details from the haunted villager, including others who shared the same experience. He even told the boy not to tell his father. Long Pei was anguished inside that the city man didn't listen to his plea. All he could do was playing along and try to keep their teacher from danger just like his father asked him to do. When is your father going to the seminar downtown? Tian asked again to make sure his plan would work. In the next 2 days, but Long Day had a pained expression as if he'd swallowed a bitter pill. Can we just cancel this plan? If my dad and Captain found out, I'd be decapitated. Don't you want to know the truth? Tien stuck his face close, trying to look intimidating, but Long Tay shook his head violently and rejected. No, I don't. But I do! Tien screamed until the boy's ears rang. Long Tay closed his ears and looked down, wanting to cry and not knowing how the captain could deal with this handful guy long all along. They agreed on the date and time to explore deep into the forest that was known as Monet or Ghost Hill. The rumors made the villagers scared of the place, but they had to brave it to make a living. Long Day begged Uncle Hubo, a veteran hunter-gatherer, to follow him into the woods, and finally got a green light. At 3 in the morning, Kama Bingle woke up and took a shower, preparing to go downtown for the registration at 7. Around 3:45 a.m., Papandaw's village chief left the house. The prodigal son, who was lying in waiting for his dad to leave, sprang up as soon as he heard his father's footsteps going down the stairs. He got up to brush his teeth and wash his face to make himself up, and rummaged for his traditional clothes the teacher wanted to borrow. The hut that stood at the end of the village was bright with the lamplight, meaning the man inside had woken up as well. Ken opened the door as he heard a faint sound calling his name. He was already dressed in Akka costume that Kama Bingle had given him, yet his winter jacket was too bright and he feared the ghost would be too shy to show up. So he asked Long Tay to bring him a woven long-sleeve jacket. The younger man quietly helped his older friend putting on a turban, the symbol of being an Akka, and finally said, "You can still change your mind, you know." The city man who heard this all day pulled a face. "We've already made our plan. I have to go there to prove something." "But perhaps the ghost won't show up today." Ken shrugged nonchalantly. "If it doesn't today, I'll keep going up there until it does." "What if it's a real one, bro? We might be scared shitless." Long Day rubbed his arm that got goosebumps. The mastermind grinned. He went to pick up a plastic bag with white powder and handed it to the younger man. "This is called the blessed wine. I guarantee that if we throw it at the ghost, he'll be cast out." Long Day's mouth fell open as he took the bag. "Where did you get this?" "From Staff Sergeant Yod. I told him I want it for my vegetable plots," he said as he put his old bag of light and a flashlight into the woven basket he'd borrowed from the villagers to make everything look more convincing. Hearing the answer, Long Day went speechless. He rubbed his face to give himself moral support. Whatever will be, will be. "Let's get going. Uncle Hubo must be waiting for us at the waterfall." Both men cast their flashlights along the route. It was dark and silent, since the villagers were still asleep. Even if the walk wasn't steep or rough, Yen stumbled on rocks and nearly fell many times in the dark, and the younger and stronger boy had to give him hands. "This is why we don't go out at night, except when we go hunting. It's risky. But now we started since 4 because the deep, lush forest is farther away and it takes longer time to reach there by dawn." Long Tay explained their livelihood to the city boy until they reached Pamok Waterfall. The waterfall's magnificence couldn't be seen in the dark, yet they could still hear the thundering cascade that fell against the basin underneath, which dried up in the dry season. It didn't take long for them to spot the man they came to see, thanks to a bamboo torch at the edge of the woods. Longpei and Uncle Kubo greeted each other before turning to look at him. Ken smiled sweetly at the older hunter who looked friendly and kind. Kubo didn't speak the central dialect, so they communicated through the village chief's son. The hunter pulled out a bottle of oil with a pungent smell and told them to rub it on their limbs and feet to protect against leeches and insects. As they finished, Uncle Hubo insisted that both boys followed him closely to not get lost in the forest. Then they walked in line through the dense woods on a narrow path. Ken cast the light to the front of his feet. There was nothing but darkness, and he swallowed thickly. It was cold, and the haunting whistling wind that blew across the canopy made his imagination run wild. He slowed down to flank Longpei to give himself some assurance. Are you okay, bro? I used to come up here twice with that. I remembered that the spot was right over there. He pointed to an even higher hill. The city boy knew his own limit, so he said honestly, if we take some rest, I'll be fine. He fetched a bottle of water in the basket on his back to sip, quenching his thirst. As they went deeper into the forest, Uncle Hubo would stop once in a while as he picked up herbs in the shrubs and that allowed Tian to have a break. After they had stopped for an umpteenth time, they finally encountered a narrower path on a steeper plain. Tian miscalculated his steps and nearly fell back many times, unlike both Aquaman, who grabbed and held onto the branches for support. As they reached an intersection which an inexperienced trekker like Tian couldn't tell due to the dense groves and trees, Kubo stopped and turned with a serious expression. Tian looked back and forth as the two Akha stopped, not knowing a single word. Longtei sensed the questioning stare and said, Uncle Hubo wanted to pick puffballs on the right, but he didn't want to put us at risk. The taller boy leaned down and whispered, That's where we called Ghost Hill. Is he afraid of ghosts? Of course, but he has to do it. Puffballs only grow on this patch of the forest. We can't grow them in a greenhouse. It's even drier this year, so they have to venture into the deep forest, hoping to get lucky. Puffballs make really big money at markets. So tell him, what's he waiting for? There are the three of us here. Let's do it. Ken raised a fist, turning to give the hunter his encouragement. He didn't know if he made the right call. The path before them was winding and deep, so deep that even when the first light touched the sky, this patch was still gloomy due to the thick canopy above. Owls who had been watching them from somewhere made loud hoots across the forest. Hot vapor from the soil met with cool morning air, creating white, thin fog all over the wood. Puffballs usually grew on dead logs or tree roots on the ground, making them hard to find. That led to the man-made wildfire of some reckless people that caused smog over the city. Since the woods were dense, foraging puffballs required wading through thick shrubs and looking underground. The backups who came with the hunter decided to offer help. They split and were looking across the ground that was covered by a thick pile of dried leaves, keeping a short distance from one another. Longpei flashed the light at the big roots and probed them with his finger. He found a cluster of smooth, white mushrooms under soggy soil. He called it Tien to see the unique characteristics of the mushroom before digging them out by wood plant. The foragers went deeper and deeper to the forest. The city boy who had been bending his back looking for the mushroom for quite some time straightened up and wiped the sweats across his forehead, leaving dirt marks across his cheeks. He looked around, feeling dejected that the ghost hadn't bothered to show up at all. Maybe it was real? That was why the man without any sixth sense like him couldn't see one. A cold breeze brushed against his back, blowing the scent of burnt grass to his nose. Even if the smell was very faint, it still made the delicate city boy who had allergies sneeze a few times. As Tien pulled out a mushroom from the soil, there was a rustling sound of leaves in a shrub in front of him. stopping him in his track. All of a sudden, his eyes that got accustomed to the darkness spotted a quick movement in front of him. His eyes widened. His mind didn't have enough time to process what was going on, but his feet already shot out into a sprint. Long Tay whipped around and yelped, startled. Tien, stop! The younger man shouted as Tien ran further into the deep forest, but he didn't listen. He only stopped once all movements around him quieted down and everything returned to silence. Fuck! Where did it go? The mischievous teacher growled under his breath. His smooth face was red from the blood that was pumping all over his body and turned into a deep scowl as he was filled with rage. Even if that thing was a ghost, it would have been frightened by the deadly look on the man's face. Might be a snake or a small animal, Longtay said and ushered him. Let's go back on our track. We're too far away. I'm afraid we'd lose Uncle Kubo. Ken, who was bending over his knees, straightened up and took in a deep breath, only to choke out once the familiar burnt odor in the fog became more pungent. Longtay rushed in to rub his back, concerned. Are you okay, bro? Did, did he smell that? When he still lived recklessly, he had tried all kinds of drugs, especially joints, which were their basic entertainment. Yet his allergy and fragile health always gave him bronchitis as soon as he got the dangerous substances, and he could barely breathe. Even if he wanted to die, this wasn't the way he wanted to go. It was too painful. Longtail looked up and inhaled to test the air. Perhaps someone is burning the forest for the mushrooms. Yeah, could be. Tien didn't want to tell the boy what he thought it was. But you'd better not inhale it. He pulled down the turban to wrap around his nose and mouth and told the other man to do the same. They walked back along the same track, tracing their own footprints on the dried leaves that created a visible trail. But they didn't reach the spot they had left when a loud wail broke out across the forest. Long Tay and Tien looked at each other, and they knew immediately from the frightened look in each other's eyes. Uncle Hubo. Both men kicked off in a full sprint, kicking up leaves as they ran. As they reached the place they'd left, the older hunter-gatherer wasn't there. A loud, maddening cry shot up again not far away. Ken made up his mind at that moment to throw off the basket on his back so he could move freely and fetch the bag of lime. He'd kick that cursed ghost's ass as soon as he see it. Grab your lime bag and let's go! The mastermind talked through the cloth over his mouth. Long Tay did as he was told without a second thought. He ran after the older friend towards the direction where the wail was coming from. Uncle Hubo's godly, freaked-out frame had run into the thick forest without fearing he'd be scratched by thorns on the branches. Ken didn't see what made the older man run away, so he signaled to the taller boy to cut the hunter in the front. As Hubo saw that someone was blocking his way, he freaked out, backing off, only to hit against a man with a turban around his face, leaving the eyes to be seen. The older hunter screamed, lifting his hands to perform a trembling one. He was frightened out of his wit. Something isn't right. Long Tay was about to rip his turban away to reveal his identity, but the teacher stopped him, grabbing his wrist. The Akha boy had to talk to the older man through the fabric, and even if Tian didn't know a single word, he knew that Uncle Kubo wasn't listening. All he did was prostrating on the ground, asking for mercy. This is not good. I think we should. He didn't finish the sentence, and the older man took the chance and threw his basket at the two men. The taller boy grabbed the container filled with puffball mushrooms in time, but the weight made him stagger backward. Ken lunged forward to help the younger man so he couldn't stop Uncle Hugo from running in another direction. Are you alright? I'm okay, but Uncle Hugo, he's gone, Ken said, frowning, as he pulled down the cloth over his nose a little before pulling it up once again a millisecond later. The burning weed is so strong here. Don't take off your mask if you don't want to hallucinate like that. How did you know? Longray asked innocently. He never tried weeds, even if this whole area had once been a marijuana plantation. I've tried it before. The almond eyes thinned as he grinned. It's not that bad when you pack the weed in the joint, but if you try it with a bong, oh man, that sweet, juicy dope, it was like you were in heaven. Bong is a Thai word for a cylindrical tube, originally a wooden one, used for smoking substances, a water pipe for smoking marijuana. Dad, this dude was really scarier than ghosts. Tian slapped the boy's thick shoulder and glared. Don't act that spooked out. I quit everything. Even if the Boy Scout whose father was the village chief still looked skeptical, Ken didn't mind. He clutched his lime bag and looked around as the sun was getting brighter. The bogus ghost that spooked Uncle Hubo must be around here. But what if it was real? A real ghost doesn't need weed to make an overture. That thing just made wanted to make us high. The city boy spat and halted as he saw a white speck flashing through the shrubs. It's there! He pointed in the direction and dragged Long Tay, who was sitting on the ground, to begin the chase. That ghost must have been hiding and eavesdropping for quite some time. Seeing that they didn't react to the weeds, he decided to run away. It must have taken the ghost by surprise that they didn't get high and were even chasing on its tail. Both young men waded through the thickets, following the ghost, but whenever they got close, the figure in a white cloth would vanish as if he knew every turn in the forest. Tian sensed the chase was useless. He was exhausted and thought of a shortcut by picking up a rock. Its size fitted well into his palm, and threw it at the ghost. As a former pitcher in a baseball team during his summer semester in the US, the rock hit right on the back of the bogus ghost. The phantom cried out in pain and dropped to the ground. Long Thay, who had long legs and was running in front, took this moment and caught up. But before he took hold of a man, he jumped away, and all Long Tay caught was the tip of the white cloth that got ripped. Tien, who finally caught up, tried to grasp the culprit, but the man spun around and threw something at him. His arm shot up instinctively to shield his face and threw the lime bag at the back of the head of the gaudy figure. The white powder exploded from the broken bag, creating white dust. Ken shut his eyes and turned away as the bogus ghost limped away. The volunteer teacher wiped the lime powder from his eyes and pulled out the turban from his nose to clear the air. I almost got him! Damn it! He picked up the rubber ghost mark from the ground and cursed. What should we do next, Pitien? Monte asked, panting. At least we know the ghosts that frightened the guys weren't real. The air became clear and fresh again with no trace of burned weed, and Tian inhaled deeply. I just don't know why. I guess it's about illegal labor hiding in the woods. They don't want to be found. The wild teacher looked towards the direction the ghost had fled. A cold, humorless smile appeared across his lips. The blessed lime must have been working its magic by now. Its heavier and rougher particles left more traces than those of powder. We've come this far. Let's follow him before the traces are gone. The lime that was spotting on the ground and leaves made it easier for the amateur investigators to track the ghost. But as they trudged on, the powder started to trail off and finally vanished. Both men looked at each other as if to ask what to do next. Longtail looked around. Even if the light was streaming in, the forest was still dense and gloomy that the freshmen started to be discouraged. Titian, can we stop here? If we go any deeper, we'd get into Myanmar. Just a bit further, come on! I'm sure he's around here. Tian's stubbornness made him want to go on. He didn't want to give up now and return empty handed. Which way should we go next? The traces are all gone. We're not trekkers. We don't have any compass. If we use the same route, maybe we can still trace it back to the village. The city boy pressed his lips, weighing their options. Unable to decide, he saw that the boy's line was still there. We can use this! He grabbed a plastic bag from Long Bay. We'll just sprinkle the powder on the trees as we go on and trace them on our way back. We won't get lost. He blurted out the idea, thrilled, oblivious to how the boy was about to cry. Why is he so stubborn? Longday sighed for the upteenth time and followed the tall, slender man even if he didn't want to. They broke branches to make symbols and dusting the lime to make the marks along the path. Sweats were breaking out on their skin, making them itchy, especially on the scratches from the branches. The humid and hot temperature and physical exertion since early morning made Tian exhausted and frustrated. That damned ghost. Why is it so hard to catch him? Once I get you, I'll kick your ass into jail. The volunteer teacher furiously swatted off the bushes that got in his way and stopped dead in his track as he caught a glimpse of something through the gaps among the branches. He whipped around, wanting to call for the boy who was behind him, but Longtail lunged forward to cover his mouth and pulled him to crouch down and hide. In front of them lied a downward slope that met with a deep basin below. From where they were, it was still visible how the bogus ghost still had the powder on his head and was trying to plead with a Y at a group of men dressed in fine shirts. One of them was a chubby man with a thick gold necklace around his neck with 10 Buddhist amulets. Tian immediately recognized the guy, Master Sakda. Behind him lay the piles of massive logs that hadn't been processed. He didn't know what kind of wood they were, but he could tell from their fat trunks that they must have been decades old. No wonder why they needed a ghost to frighten the villagers from coming too close to their operating base and be on the officials' radar. Tien, let's go. That guy's here. They must already know that they've been busted. Longtail shook his arm, begging him to leave before they could get in any danger. Ken regretted not having his cell phone with him so he could take some photographic evidence, but he could report the goon's coordinates. He nodded, agreeing with the Aka boy that it was time to leave. But luck wasn't on their side this time. As they were crawling on their knees backward, a gunman with a rifle in his hands, who stood guard for the illegal timber, spotted the movement behind the bushes. He shouted in an unknown language to signal his men and fired his gun. The volunteer teacher and young student pressed their faces on the ground as the bullet flew above their heads and hit a tree trunk right beside them. That was close. Tien slapped his hand hard on Longtay's back, urging him to run. Both young men jumped up and dashed off, escaping the bullets that were flying through the bushes. Longtay knew that these illegal loggers must have been illegal smugglers from Myanmar, who operated along Thai-Myanmar borders as far as he guessed from the language they spoke. In only a few minutes, the men caught up with them on the hill. It was impossible to use the trail they had marked since the men were closing in from all directions. Seeing the younger man's ashen face, Tian was plagued with guilt. He ignored Long Fei's warning, and it was because of him that they were now in grave danger. Long Fei, you go back on the lime trail. I'm going to lead them to the other direction, he told the Akha boy as they were panting behind a large rain tree. I'm not going to leave you. If we don't split, we're both going to die here, Tian yelled. You know the way up here better than I do. You go back to the village and get help. I will stay out of their sight. Long Day bit his lips hard. It got bloody. He had to make up his mind. Tian, promise me you'll stay alive until I come back with help. Okay. Tian let out a pretense bark and gave the boy a tired smile. If you're not leaving now, I would be dying here for real. The son of the village chief reached out and squeezed Tian's hand like a gentleman's promise, and he dashed off behind the thickets to hide from the hunting parties. Tian looked up and closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. He was a daredevil. When he had been on the brink of death from that heart disease, he still went out to race almost every night, challenging death itself. Now, the miraculous second chance had been given was making him fearful. If he failed at holding on to it, he wouldn't be able to meet everyone who taught him to reunite with his self-esteem ever again. The volunteer teacher balled his hand into a tight fist and shouted to draw the thugs' attention to him. I'm right here, motherfuckers! As he had tricked them to lost the sense of direction, he pressed hard into the soil to make distinct footprints before taking the shoes off and jumped over the leaves in another direction. Tian hugged his shoes as he hid between a rock shelf on the slope. His new heart was exerting itself as best as it could, making his whole chest throb with pain. He was too tired to lift a finger. Perhaps his ruse worked on them for a while, Tian thought as he pressed his face to his knees. The eerie silence in the woods was eating away at his courage, and he was seeing a lot of faces in his mind. The last one belonged to that tall, massive officer. The captain once said he lived to serve and protect. Would he sacrifice his life to protect a troublemaker? A clicking sound appeared above his head, followed by a pressing force from the barrel of a gun against his skull. Ken swallowed quickly, realizing that he'd been caught. You think you can fool me with your trick, punk? Get up! The man who carried the pistol shouted clearly in Thai. The man in an Aka costume raised his hands to surrender and turned to face the other, seeing a bearded man who narrowed his eyes. The thug stared at him a while and shouted, You're that volunteer teacher! He dared kicking up dust in the boss territory? The school was burned down. Haven't you learned a lesson? So it was you! Dan gritted his teeth, fuming. Coward son of bitches! How dare you hurt the kids! Hearing the cuss, Mustard sacked the spoon, raised his hand to slam the handle of the pistol against the young man's face, but the fearless teacher shouted at him again. I'm the son of a former commander of the military. If you hurt or kill me, the whole battalion will wipe you off the face of the earth. If you want a bird in hell, then do it! The goon stopped in his track, hearing the threat. He stared at the smooth, fair face of someone from a well-to-do background, and the shapely, arrogant, and commanding eyes spoke of authority. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to lower the gun. Let's take him to Master Sakta, he told the others to take hold of the teacher. Ken surrendered, not wanting to get hurt from the struggle. At least he could stall until the rescue arrived. He was captured with hands behind his back as he was taken in by a group of ruthless men. He used all the tricks he learned from TV dramas, asking to stop to relieve himself twice, telling them he was having a leg pain, panting, exhausting, but it didn't work. The goons just kept walking, and he was being dragged along the way until they reached the trail of white line. Desperation kicked in as he realized that they were approaching Master Sakta's den. There was nothing left to be done to buy his time. All of a sudden, a series of gunshots broke out across the forest. The thugs exchanged looks, certain that the noises came from the logging camp. Tian listened to the chaos with a thundering heart. His thin lips lifted into a tight smirk, pleased that karma was serving them right, until the goon who he had hit before shouted at him. It's because of you, you bastard! You fuck everything up wherever you go. What about that friend you brought, huh? The lookout guy was a fake ghost had told him two guys were chasing him. Now you know, you fucktard. If my friend didn't make it, your operating base wouldn't be bombed right now. The goon slammed the hill of the gun on his cheek until the skin broke and bled. I should have killed you! It's too late to kill me now! Your boss is screwed! Ian bursts out laughing, angering Master Sackler's goons who closed in, wanting to beat him up. The teacher took the moment to shake loose and kick the first man who came at him. The fight broke out, but it was the volunteer teacher who was being beaten up. He bent over, protecting his head, the most important part of the body, from being injured. Finally, the man who spoke Thai stopped his men. That's enough. Let's go help the master. He yanked Tian's arm and dragged him away. Tian scrambled up. His clothes were stained by footprints as the goons ran off. They suddenly stopped and raised their arms high above their heads. The man who was carrying firearms slowly lowered their weapons and lied face down to the ground. What the fuck are you doing? I told you to go to the master! The leader among them shouted as he brutally dragged Tian along. Yet he shut his mouth as soon as he saw 10 barrels of guns appearing from the thick bushes. Men in green camouflages restored the hope in the city boy's frightened heart. The droopy, bruised eyes peered hard at the group of soldiers who were pointing their rifles at the goons, ready to attack. As his eyes caught the sight of a tall, massive man who was leading in the front, Tian was washed with relief. He knew that this man would be able to protect him. Yet his tiny hope was killed when the thug yanked him and locked him around the neck and pressed the gun to his temple. Stop right there, or he's dead! Tian rolled his eyes, fed up. He spat to the ground, and his saliva was bloody. A hostage? That's so cliche, man! The goon's face twisted with rage. The hostage wasn't afraid and even mocked him. Shut the fuck up! I'm going to blow your brain out. Then do it, motherfucker! Captain Pupa watched the two quarreling men and felt his veins throb. He lowered the barrel of his rifle to the ground and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit near the goon and the hostage's feet, and both men jumped. Shut up, or I'll shoot! Dan's eyes met with the officer's harsh stare and swallowed quickly. He was never a target of the captain's ruthless side, and his knees shook. Your boss was arrested with the evidence. Surrender now and you'll get less jail time. The man who spoke was wearing camouflage with a different symbol and a neckerchief in different color, meaning he was from the Department of Forestry who joined the force in the crackdown. I don't buy it. Surrender? It's going to be a life sentence for us anyway. Captain Pupa looked at the bruises on Tian's smooth face and pain gripped his heart. He blurted out, if you don't let the hostage go, you'll be dead. Tian sensed the captain's apprehension and worry under his harsh stance. He realized then he couldn't linger and had to do something even if it was dangerous. He took in a deep breath and took his chance while the goon was distracted by the border police force. He pushed the hand that was holding the gun away and slammed his elbow into the thug's temple. The criminal staggered, stunned, and he pulled the trigger. The officers were quick and dodged the bullet, but that millisecond allowed the other thugs who were lying down to spring up and attack. The standoff became a tumultuous fight. Pupa lunged at the goon who was wrestling with Tien, knocking the gun away, and lost his in the process. They were struggling in a fist fight as Tien backed off, crawling quickly on the ground to hide behind a large tree. The massive officer and the ruthless thug took a turn to hit and kick each other. The criminal grabbed a piece of wood to use as a weapon. Tien covered his mouth, pained as he witnessed the captain lost his balance and the log hammered down across his body. This wasn't a TV show. It was something real, and Tien was certain the officer's bones must have been broken. Yet the captain still fought his enemy like a warrior he was. How could a civilian, a normal, useless guy like him help? He looked at the gun that lay on the ground not far away. Tien weighed his options. Even if he had been at a firing range with his wealthy friends, but he couldn't be called a marksman. If he missed and shot the captain, it would be a grave mistake. But now it was the time or never. He grabbed a thin branch to move the pistol closer and grabbed it. It was an old revolver that required cocking before pulling the trigger. He had sneaked in and played with his father's collection and found that it wasn't too complicated. Now all he had to do was wait for the right moment. That moment soon came as Pupa shoved the man away with his foot. The millisecond two men were apart, a loud shout rang out. Captain! Dodge! Pupa crouched down instinctively and turned to the younger man who was standing poised with a gun in his hand. The city boy aimed his shot at the criminal who was still staggering. He pulled the trigger and fell backward from the kickback. The recoil made the bullet lost its trajectory and hit right into the thug's thigh, sending him backward. Master Sackless man growled from pain and anger. That son of a bitch teacher again. He became enraged as he dragged his bleeding leg to fetch a pistol that fell to the ground after the tussle. He took hold of the weapon, pointed at his enemy, and pulled the trigger without aiming. The tall officer lunged forward and grabbed at the waist of the troublemaker until they rolled on the ground. Tien sensed how the larger man who was holding him convulsed. The captain snatched the gun from his hand, took out the revolver, and fired. He was a trained officer. The bullet hit the thug's chest, making him cry out with pain as he fell to the ground. He wriggled for a moment and stopped. They finally had the situation under control. The culprits were dead or injured, while the soldiers and the police forces were equally bruised. Fortunately, they didn't lose anyone. All of a sudden, the larger body on top of Tien slumped down. The blood tang hit his nose as he reached out to touch the captain's broad back, wanting to call his name because the man didn't move. Yet the wet, soggy touch on his camouflage shirt made Tien stop breathing. The city boy slowly looked at his trembling hand. A thick, red trail of blood was trickling down his finger. Captain! He rolled the injured man over to lie across his lap. Easy. Pupa winced from the pain. You're hurt! Did you get shot? Where's the wound? Tien was sputtering, not knowing what to do. I'm okay. It's far from the heart. The young captain smiled sweetly, as if to comfort the younger man. But as the handsome face lost most of its color, Tien started sobbing harder. How come the guy who was on the verge of death could still joke? Tears were running from the reddened almond eyes. Thin hands clutched at the captain's sleeve, shaken to the core. How could he live without this man? This disaster reminded him of the fact that in the world he was nothing but a naive, helpless boy. Pupa gathered all his remaining strength to lift his trembling hand and wiped the tears on bruised cheeks with his thumb. Don't cry. Hurry up and get help. As darkness swallowed him, his mind still hurt and sobbing as the younger man cried out his name. I told you, don't cry. It hurts me more than the gunshot wound. Don't you know that? The hospital that was a part of a famous university in Chiang Rai was crowded by late morning. The patient beds of the inpatient ward were all occupied. The volunteer teacher lied with his eyes open, his whole body aching and throbbing from being beaten black and blue. Luckily, the injuries were external and no bones were broken. The once smooth face was now marred with yellow spots of antiseptic and bandages. His whole body was dotted with purple and green bruises, just like Gekko's. It had been 3 whole days since he stayed here and waited for the news about Captain Pupa. Some soldiers in the company had carried the unconscious officer to the field and called for a chopper to pick him up. Other men who were injured, including Tien himself, were later taken to the hospital. Luckily, Long Tay was studying at one of the faculty in the same university, so he paid him a regular visit, either in the morning, at lunchtime, or in the evening. His bed was next to the window and he was enjoying the view to kill his boredom and kept his spirit up. It had been 5 days since the captain was taken out of the operating room and put into an ICU. He heard that his condition was stable and improving and there was no infection. He was transferred to a single room where the hospital had to put up a sign "No visitors" to give the captain a full rest. Even so, knowing that Pupa was safe, Tien was still restless from not seeing him in person. He let out a heavy sigh. What's up, Etienne? Long Day asked as he dragged a chair to sit next to the bed on the first day he came to see the teacher. The injured man turned to look at the younger man. Nothing, just bored. The man in university student uniform, a white shirt and black pants, gave him a knowing glance. You're worried about the captain? Ken admitted it. There was no reason to say no. The man was wounded because of him. They won't allow visitors. I'm afraid it was more than being shot in the shoulder and a broken arm. Don't worry too much. The captain's safe now. Longday changed the topic. Dad came to see you today. He's talking to the cashier about your expenses. Since volunteer teachers weren't getting paid, Seng Tong Foundation insured them with an accident package as a show of gratitude for their sacrifice, having to live in far rural areas. Why aren't you in class? It's already 9. The teacher asked as he saw that it was late and the university student sprang up from the chair. I have a test today, so I'm leaving now. He did a quick Y and dashed out of the room. Ken's eyes followed the younger man in a white shirt and black pants and thought of his faculty. He sometimes missed that part of his life. If he returned to the class the next semester, his classmates would be in their senior year. Kama Bingle showed up in his brown safari shirt, an unusual look on him, with gifts like a bakery and snacks that he thought city people enjoyed. How are you feeling, teacher? I haven't seen you in days. The elder man's face was painted with a friendly and kind smile, as always, even if it was Tien who had put his beloved son in danger. He was overwhelmed with guilt. If it was in the past, he would just ask, how much compensation do you want? But now he was ridden with his conscience that some precious things couldn't be retrieved once lost, no matter how much pleading or begging. He put his hands into a Y and asked for forgiveness from the bottom of his heart. I'm really, really sorry, Uncle Bingley, that I took Long Day with me. If something happened to him, I didn't know how to make it up to you. Bingley shook his head, not taking any offense. But you got hurt because you protected my boy. You didn't make a decision to risk your life just by yourself. Longday wouldn't have a chance to escape and get help. The soldiers came so fast, I thought I wouldn't make it. The captain ordered his men to patrol the village all the time. He knew about your disappearance even before he found Longday. Tian dropped his eyes and whispered as he thought of the tall captain. I shouldn't have done that. It was because of me that everyone got hurt. No, you're a brave man. Tama Bingley took his hand to give reassurance. If you didn't catch on about the weeds and found out about the fake ghost, the villagers must be living in fear right now because of our superstition about ghosts and spirits is so ingrained in our way of life. Besides, the officers were thrown off the track many times they were unable to launch the attack. Tian smiled bitterly. It was a compliment he wished he wasn't getting. If he knew that he'd be the one who put Pupa into a fatal risk. I was talking to the doctor before I came to see you. You're free to go home. Today? He didn't see the captain yet. The village chief leaned in and whispered, that's how state hospitals are, teacher. They didn't want people who already got better to stay around for too long. There are a lot more patients wanting to be treated. Ken half-heartedly nodded since he couldn't beat that reasoning. Kama Bingle went to ask the doctor to check up on him one last time. The nurse helped him change clothes in the restroom. He looked at the black and blue face with tired eyes reflected in the mirror and seemed to ponder something. Perhaps he should take another chance. He couldn't bear going back without seeing that man. The city boy dragged his beaten body to the special care unit on the upper floor. It was an isolated area, so it wasn't so crowded like the rest of the hospital. As he was dressed in normal clothes and dropped his face to hide from the staff, no one was paying him attention. They were all busy, like all state hospitals were. They didn't have time to scrutinize all the wards. The room at the far end of the hall still had a sign with the big letters saying no visitors, making Ken disappointed. Even a family would run away seeing such a strict off limit zone. He looked left and right. Seeing that no one was looking, he slowly turned the unlocked knob and silently pushed the door open. His eyes quickly searched for the patient's bed, and his heart skipped a beat as he saw that it was empty. His blood froze and his body started to shake. No. Captain? Ken whispered. He scanned the small room until his eyes landed on the balcony's door that was left wide open. The tall man he was looking for was right there, with his back to the room. The captain's broad back under the sun was rock solid and impenetrable, just like the one in the photo. That first photo had been imprinted in his mind. His head went blank right at that moment as if everything in the world had faded into oblivion. Ken lunged forward and wrapped his arms around the strong torso, holding on tight. The warmth from the man in flesh and blood seeped into his body as he burst into tears. The sobbing like a little boy and the wetness against his back made the poker-faced officer smile. He lifted the arm that wasn't encased in a cast to cover the slender ones that were tightly holding onto him.
I told you I'm fine. The bullet went through my shoulder, and the doctor already patched me up.
The truth was he had bled profusely. If he didn't make it to the hospital on time, he might have fallen into a cardiac arrest. How should I know that? There's a sign at the door saying no visitors allowed. I thought you were still in critical condition. And sobbed as he talked as if to release all the pent-up stress during the past days. Pupa chuckled loudly and said with a hint of exasperation,
And you broke the rule one more time.
I'm leaving the hospital today. I was afraid I wouldn't see you again. The young captain turned around and touched the bruised face as he stared deep into the reddened eyes.
So stop crying and take a good look at me.
Tin lifted his hands. He cupped the handsome face that had turned a little pale with the bruised cheeks and split lips. And yet the captain stood against all odds until this very moment. The younger man smiled sweetly as he ran his thumbs across the bruises on Pupa's cheeks. You look like a mess. Pupa leaned down and pressed his forehead against the younger man's and stayed like that in their lingering touch.
And you look just as awful.
Both men laughed as their worries vanished. Tough time brought people together. That saying must have been true. Tian had never felt that his life had some meaning and that he needed to do something for someone like he was feeling now. Papandao had transformed him in every possible way. I'm sorry, Thorfan. Now your heart is completely mine. The medical team responsible for the captain was satisfied. The patient had recovered in less than a week, meaning that he was strong enough to stop the IV treatment within the first 3 days. Captain Pupa thanked the doctor and the nurse who checked on him in the morning and told him that he could return to the camp within a few days. As the people in white gowns and uniform left, another doctor showed up in casual wear, carrying bags of duck in a brown sauce from a famous restaurant and jasmine rice for his friend.
I ran into the doc so we talked about your condition. You're strong like an ox.
He teased as he adjusted the bed to recline and put another pillow under Pupa's back to give more comfort.
I want to leave as soon as possible. You want to go back to work or to someone?
The doctor with a fair face and slant eyes said knowingly. Pupa scoffed, hiding his emotions.
Don't be a nuisance. Just get me out.
Alright, alright. The buddy shook his head in surrender, then acted as if something just came to him. He pulled out a piece of paper with a name and phone number. Colonel Thor called me the other day asking for an update. I told him you were shot and hospitalized. He asked about Dong Tien, so I said he didn't get any serious injuries, just bruises, and he had returned to the village. Oh yeah, he told you to call the chief of staff. Colonel Thor was the nickname of the commander of their company, but Pupa had never heard of the mentioned chief of staff before. Pupa paused and picked up the piece of paper to read. Colonel Pitan. He took a deep breath, knowing that this final day had to come, but didn't expect it to be this soon.
Can I use your phone?
The colonel said he can wait till you get well.
I'm okay, Lily. I'm fine.
The injured man said, as if to convince himself. Wasant pressed his lips and handed his friend the phone, watching the captain punch the number written on the paper, curious. Yet he was smart enough to hold back the question. The patient put the latest model of smartphone to his ear, and the other end picked up in less than 10 seconds.
Captain Pupa Virianon, reporting for duty, sir.
He listened to the other man inquire about his well-being before going right to the matter. Pupa listened to the colonel as if it was just a noise passing through his ears. His eyes dimmed upon hearing the final command.
Yes, sir. I'll send him back.
The colonel excused himself to hang up after the important topic was discussed. Dr. Wasant watched as his friend's mood darkened and let out a heavy sigh. You're happy about getting back to the camp a few seconds ago. Why are you making a face like a wilted, stinking corpse lily? Rafflesia arnoldii is a species of flowering plant in the parasitic genus Rafflesia. It is noted for producing the largest individual flower on Earth. It has a very strong and unpleasant odor of decaying flesh.
Nothing.
The stubborn captain refused to talk, like always. Seems like the guy needed tough love. Tough love. Wazan put his hand on the edge of the bed and leaned closer. Since we're talking, let's exchange some secrets.
Whose secrets?
Dong Tian's secret. His slant eyes behind the lens shone cunningly. Do I have your attention now? Pupa frowned, inexplicably furious. Was there something he still didn't know about Tian? But he told this son of a gun doctor friend of his?
Just spit it out already.
The military physician clicked his tongue like a man who had an upper hand. To be fair, let's strike quid pro quo. I ask you first. Who's Colonel Pitan and how is he related to Tian or you?
Those are two questions.
The injured man glared at his buddy, but the foxy doctor wasn't discouraged. There's a conjunction, so it's the same sentence, according to a Thai grammatical rule.
Your secret turns out to be a non secret. You're dead.
Pupa raised his finger at the other man and answered.
Colonel Pitan is the right hand man of General Tirayutso Fadisipo, the retired deputy commander in chief, Yen's father.
The last part was the most important intel. Wazan's eyes widened in shock as the realization hit him. So, you've been tailing him because it was an order from the higher up? I didn't want to imagine if Yan found out how broken-hearted the boy would be,
That's true.
but only half of it. The captain bore his fangs at his friend.
You've run out of your quota. Now it's your turn to talk.
The cunning doctor cleared his throat for a while to stall, but finally started talking. You remember the scar at Yan's chest? One I said it looked like a major operation?
Yes, of course. You said it looked like a scar from a heart operation or something.
It wasn't just a balloon angioplasty or prosthetic heart valve. Mosant lowered his voice to emphasize they were talking about something grave. It was a heart transplant.
The tall man on the bed was paralyzed, as if being struck by lightning. The boy should have been under strict care. Why on earth General Thirayut had allowed his youngest son to face such hardship and danger? Wazan took in his friend's ashen face, feeling sorry for him. But he had to tell another secret. He still tried to find a connecting dot. Let me tell you one more thing. I was interrogating him about the heart, and Tien slipped. He said he came here because of Thorfan, the name of the girl who had been a volunteer teacher here for nearly a year, made Pupa froze. Thorfan was lovely, always kind and compassionate to the villagers. He always knew how she had felt for him, but he couldn't reciprocate more than a brotherly love, which she willingly accepted. She had never crossed the line until the fatal accident finally claimed her life. As they heard of the bad news, everyone was stricken by her untimely death. Thorfan had just told him happily about her birthday that she had made the biggest merit in her life. She had registered as an organ donor on her birthday. Pupa lifted his intact hand to cover his eyes. His whole body shook violently that Wasan had to touch his shoulder, worried. Oh, what's wrong? Doc, it's over now, the captain whispered in a broken voice. Perhaps it would be nice if one could just live in a dream and never had to wake up and face the truth. End of chapter 11.